Thank you, Allison, and thanks everyone for being with us in presence here or online. It is a pleasure to be back and talk about entrepreneurship. I have been talking about entrepreneurship, working with entrepreneurs for years, and it's always fun to hear what you are up to. I had the opportunity to talk with folks in the room about things that you're working on. And I'm inspired by that. And I'm glad that you're here to learn and connect with each other. One of the things that you might wonder is why am I talking about 8 types of entrepreneurship when I've crossed out the word 4? And the quick story is that there's an article by Steve Blank. Steve wrote an article at this point, probably 10, 15 years ago. And one of the things he talked about in this article about 4 kinds of entrepreneurship, he kicks it off by saying, entrepreneurs think of other entrepreneurs as less than them, right? Oh, you're not an entrepreneur. And this definition of what is an entrepreneur caught my interest. And I believe that there are many of us out there who are entrepreneurs, and I am one of them who probably would have been in that camp of thinking, I am not. When I was here at the Tepper school, it was about creating one of these innovative companies that I've met some of you today that you're working on. And I was intrigued by that, but I didn't have the big idea. I didn't have a tech founder, a co-founder, and I thought I can't do that. So my pathway was to work in startups. And I've been orbiting the startup community for a very long time. When I was here at the Tepper School, I was very involved in the Entrepreneurship Center, and I'm so glad that all of you are tapping into this amazing resource and networking with each other. So one of the things that you heard in my introduction is that hopefully you heard in my introduction is that I do work with companies now on mergers and acquisitions. And so what's, I think, interesting to connect the dots here for all of us is one of the main messages as we're building a company, how do we ultimately think about the saleability and exit, even when we're at our starting line? And so that'll be one of the underlying things to take away. The other things I really want you to take away is that there's going to be all different kinds of entrepreneurs out there, and there's no one answer of which one are you. Hopefully you will see yourself in some of these examples, and maybe you'll tell me afterwards if I've missed anything. But in general, there are 8 kinds of entrepreneurs, and I want you to think about this in the context of you choosing your path. What is the right path for you as an entrepreneur that is going to take you to the level you aspire to be at? This is a great quote from Maya Angelou, I think, because she's saying ultimately success is liking yourself and liking what you do and how you do it. On my podcast, as mentioned by Allison in the introduction, it's called Succession Stories. I talk with entrepreneurs about the businesses they've built and grown and sold, the family businesses that they've inherited and run and were hired from the outside, the CEOs, all different kinds of people on themes around innovation, growth, and transition. And at this point, I've interviewed probably 116 people. It's a lot of people, it's a lot of conversations. And one of the things that I've realized is that there is an entrepreneurial gene. There is something that drives entrepreneurs to want to make the world a better place and have it be a place that they're solving some big problems and they're making an impact. There are 600 million entrepreneurs in this world. So we can't all possibly define them one way. So what is motivating you to be an entrepreneur? This is where we're going to start the conversation. I'm going to give you some food for thought if you have not yet considered these questions about your path. And why this is important is because the motivation. So there's strengths, motivations, and fit. And a big motivator for entrepreneurs to start their own business is to be defining their own path and be in control of their day. There's one person who's been on my show, and he says he's unemployable. He's an entrepreneur through and through. He does not want to have a boss above him. He wanted to have that control, more freedom. And it's a very inspiring thing it's a big motivator. So it's important to think about what's important to you. You know, who do you want to be working with? Where do you want to be? What are the types of things you want to be working on? How does that feel when you've arrived or when you're in it? And likewise, what are those things that you don't want to be doing? Who do you want to be associated with? And why I think that is important is because, look, the failure rate is pretty high. This is not an easy thing. Being an entrepreneur is not easy. And I can appreciate that you're all trying to make your path, and finding your fit is not always an easy thing. But yeah, within the first 2 years, 20% of new businesses don't make it to the next step. So that's why we want to make sure that we're doing this for the right reasons and we're carving out a path that makes sense for us. Now, we're going to talk about 8 different types of entrepreneurship. The bonus is the 8. The article, if you read it from Steve Blank, is that he wrote about 4. But in my research and my understanding and working with different entrepreneurs, is I think there's many other flavors too. So we're going to start out with the biggest category, which is small business entrepreneurship. Small business entrepreneurship is everywhere. Literally, 90% of entities in the United States are small and medium-sized businesses. If you Google the definition of a small to medium-sized business, you won't find one answer. I'll give you my answer. And generally, this is a range of businesses that are at least $1 million to $2 million in revenue, up to about $100 million in revenue. So that's a very big range. You might see some ranges smaller. You might see even other ranges larger. So when I talk about a small to medium-sized company in this lower middle market, that's generally what we're talking about. Now, the real small companies, the groceries and others, they are out there. And many companies employ less than 500 people. There's about 31 million types of small businesses in the US. They're employing a significant percent of people in our country. 64% of new jobs created are by businesses with less than 500 employees. And what we saw during the pandemic, and I think has persisted, is more and more businesses are opening. And which category are they remains to be seen, but a lot of them are in this category. And so they're creating jobs, they're employing lots of people in our country. And that's an important thing. Maybe we're having a battery issue. I apologize for the delay here. Allison's coming up to help me in case you can't see on camera what's happening right now. She's coming up. Help, help, help. I'm gonna turn this one off.
Maybe down. Yeah, if you go down.
All right. Is this conflicting?
Yeah, I will.
You turn that one off. Okay. All right. So what are some of the motivations and incentives to be a small business entrepreneur? And I want to also give the appreciation. Look, even if you're a startup, you're a tech startup, at one point you're still a small business. So a lot of companies fit into this category, but you're going to be your own boss. You're going to look to make a profit that sustains a certain lifestyle that you want to have. And many people do this because it is their job. So it's their business, but it's also their job. And it sustains the lifestyle for them and their family. And they are taking on the risk. There's typically maybe some business loans, and they're hiring locals, they're hiring family members, and examples would be retail, real estate, trade services, doctors, lawyers, professionals. The next category might be new for you if you haven't heard about this. Large companies having entrepreneurs in residence, corporate entrepreneurship. These are typically companies larger than 100 million in revenue. They might be publicly traded, they might not be. And there's a corporate life cycle. If you think about companies almost like people, there's a startup where you're a toddler, you're a baby, you're in diapers, and you're learning how to walk, you're learning how to run, and eventually you're adolescence, you're mature, and then for some companies, there's the death valley on the other side. So these innovations, these innovative companies, like a startup here in the startup garage at Tepper, are certainly on this upward curve. And as a company matures, and as a company, especially if it's a family-owned business and gets further and further away from that first generation entrepreneur, they may lose their entrepreneurial roots. They may lose sight of what drove them initially. You can imagine a very, very large company has a lot of processes, and perhaps some of those processes are not getting us to stay as close to the customer and understanding what some of those customer problems are. So there are corporate teams. I was on one of them in my career with American Eagle Outfitters. It was a corporate startup. We were the e-commerce startup many years ago, about 20 years ago. And we were looking for transformative innovation. What could we do differently? At that time with e-commerce was new and innovative, and it was incremental to the business. There are lots of companies that are exploring this today. I have one of my colleagues that helps us in the corporate startup lab here in the audience. And what we're doing at the corporate startup lab is we're working with large companies on their innovation projects and these masters capstone, and it's very, very exciting. So this is another area called corporate venture, where companies are investing in a portfolio of innovation within their business so that they can make build, buy, or partner decisions. One of the nice things about an Amazon Lab 126, they've created this brand, and you might hear of innovation groups within large companies, kind of like an Amazon Lab 126. What they work on is highly confidential, and when it launches, that's when we find out about it. But this group or groups like it are looking at new innovations. Other examples, and these are two friends of Tepper and friends of mine. So Gustavo at MSA had been involved and is involved with Safety.io as the general manager. And Safety.io, within this very mature publicly traded company, was a innovation around the data exhaust. What's the data coming out of other products and services that they can create a product around? And Mary Beth Green, she's a Tepper alum. She's the Chief Innovation Officer at Sheets. And they are looking at the next big thing for their company, which, if you may be familiar, is what's beyond convenience and gas and the food environment at their establishments. So that's examples of corporate innovators. Now, the motivations and incentives about being a corporate entrepreneur is that you can work somewhere in a very innovative role, but you're not starting from scratch. You know, with American Eagle Outfitters, we had an existing brand. We were bringing some new ways of working into this existing framework. And you can get some of the freedoms that you're looking for and the creativity, but a different risk profile, more low to moderate risk, because the company has more resources around you. And it may have a different financial incentive. While you might have the benefit of some stock options or other things like that, you won't necessarily have the same equity position that you would have as if you launch your company from scratch. Now, this category, the scalable startup, is something very familiar to us here at the Tepper School, and we're going to dive into that one now. I took a look at what venture dollars look like globally, and there's definitely a spike in 2021. It's dramatic. And I'm not sure exactly for all those reasons, but I think in the global position, there's certainly late stage investments. And I think with changes in the equity markets, there was a lot of dry powder. It needed to go somewhere, and it started to funnel back into existing startups. So early stage startups are also seeing higher levels of investment worldwide. Now, entrepreneurs who go into creating a scalable startup no doubt have a mission, a vision. You're here to solve a particular market need or problem, and you're super motivated for that. Many of these companies are going to seek venture funding, and you're going to look for to hire very specialized folks, whether it's in development or certain industry or backgrounds that you want to bring to your team. And you're seeking that rapid growth. Two founders I just want to mention in terms of examples. Anyone use Calendly? Calendly is such a good product. I highly recommend it. So Tope Awatona is the CEO founder of Calendly. It's a very scalable business where you can subscribe and create different ways for people to connect with you easily. It's wonderful for big companies and small companies alike. Don Charlton, the founder of Jazz HR, he was I worked with Don and at Jazz HR. He had an exit with this company, which was very exciting. And Don had created a application tracking system for human resources, how to find great talent. And so these are two examples of scalable businesses. Now, the motivations and incentives around being in a scalable startup is, look, you've got this vision and you are so motivated to achieve it. You're willing to take on the personal risk. whether you're getting venture funding or you're taking on small business loans or a commercial bank loan, you may personally be on the hook. Now, if you have venture money, you're of course going to feel on the hook, but it's a different dynamic versus lending. And there is a balance that you're seeking on the level of risk and reward in this scenario. Another kind of entrepreneurship is social entrepreneurship, which is really exciting as an emerging category. And what you'll hear is it's business for good. People are motivated because of this higher purpose that they have, and they want to solve social problems, but they want to build a business around it. We heard of one example, or two examples actually in the room today already, and they want to affect some social change. And so they're combining a charitable or social cause with a business strategy. A couple of examples here. Anyone heard of Tom's Shoes and other apparel related products? And Tom's is a buy one, give one philosophy. Jessica Jackley, she has Pittsburgh roots. She started a company that was focused on microloans. Kiva is her company. And John Miles is the CEO of iWorker, and iWorker is a firm that I use, and they've connected me with people in emerging countries, and they're my marketing team. I have someone in Brazil, I have someone in Nigeria, and they're a B corporation. So B corporations are a category for different taxation. Motivations and incentives on this side, of course, is going to be where your heart is and where your passions are. Social entrepreneurship, I think, is a very exciting category because it's a way to build a business around something you care deeply about. Innovative entrepreneurship. Isn't all entrepreneurship innovative? Well, sure, you could say that, but this is another category. You might recognize some of these faces. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, when they were creating their companies, it was all about disruptive innovation. And I also put Sarah Blakely on here. I don't know if you know Sarah. She's created Spanx into this. I don't know their revenue, but I think it's like 5 billion or so. It's up there. And Sarah created a product that she herself needed and wanted, and she presented it in a way that it solved a problem, and then it just went up from there. So it's an amazing innovation that really has helped a lot of people. Some motivations and incentives around this. How do you take this big idea and turn it into a business venture? So whether it's the early days of Apple and this idea of having your own personal computer, and Microsoft with software that any desktop could have, and for Sarah Blakely, undergarments that make women feel more confident. How do we take those ideas and turn them into a business venture? And how do we help change the way that people live for the better? So these are very motivated people. Next category is a hustler. And you might think that this is a negative. It's really not. It's a hustler. And I'm going to show you my example, and hopefully it's somebody you know. Gary Vee is literally everywhere. So if you've not heard of Gary Vee, please Google him, Gary Vaynerchuk and VaynerMedia. He, to me, epitomizes the hustler entrepreneur because he's started small, he's focused, he's bootstrapped everything, and just an incredible work ethic. And he's seemingly exploded onto the scene. We literally see him in many places on the news and social media. He's just doing a fantastic job of it. He's just doing what it takes. An imitator entrepreneur, again, I'm not using this word as a negative, it's just to describe. An imitator is basically saying, look, Sam Walton did not invent retail, okay? He did not invent the store. He invented a way for shoppers to find the products that they needed in one place, and also the service and drive to serve the customer. And how they did it was their secret sauce, but he clearly did not invent retail. Likewise, Barbara Corcoran with the Corcoran Group, she did not invent real estate, right? And then Herman Cain did not invent pizza. So an imitator is saying, okay, there's something existing in the market that I think I can do better. Let's learn from these existing assets, these existing processes. Take McDonald's, right? Even McDonald's with the optimization of the cooking area and that was all about how do we do this better? So how do we find our business model, find the industries with potential? How do we learn from past mistakes? How do we capitalize that, create a measurable customer base, and just stay focused? And this last category is a buyer entrepreneur. And I think if this was me sitting in your chair 20 years ago, listening to someone talk about the different kinds of entrepreneurship, and I brought up this category, I would have said, oh my gosh, that's me. And so I really relate to this category, especially now working in mergers and acquisitions. I've met a lot of acquisition entrepreneurs, people who are buying existing businesses. And some of these faces you may recognize from the Tepper School. If you are an MBA student, Chris Sinkar is teaching franchise acquisition. He himself is an acquisition entrepreneur, has been a successful acquisition entrepreneur for years, and he has a specialty in franchises. Len Carrick is definitely a serial entrepreneur. Both of these gentlemen have actually, all three of them have been on my podcast, by the way. So if you want to learn more about them, you can check out their episodes. Their stories are really, really interesting. Len is serial entrepreneur of buying a business and improving it just as Chris did, and then selling it and then doing it again. And he's come up with an amazing operational process for that. And then Jamie Van Buren has a search fund that you may have heard of here. He's affiliated with the Tepper School. Some of the MBAs have gone to partner with him. And what he's helping them do is get funded, have a back engine for how do you source and find a company that is interested in selling in I'd call it the lower middle market category. So very, very interesting examples. And the motivation here is a little bit different because they're buying into something that's more proven with an opportunity to improve it and then realize potential exit in the future or hold it. You know, there are many people that want to pass it along to their kids. And so there's one client I have right now. He says he's looking for a company. He wants to grow it, improve it, and then one day have his kids be involved with it or benefit from it. And he's in his 40s. His kids are young, so he's definitely thinking ahead. And it's more moderate risk. You're going to take out some business loans for the acquisition, most likely, and you are, going to make it work using the skill sets that you bring to the table. So, in summary, and then we're going to open it up for some questions. I want you to think about what is motivating you as an entrepreneur. Everybody is going to have a different answer. Think about what your strengths are, your motivations, and where you want to find your fit. And if any of these 8 categories are resonating with you, then I definitely encourage you to pursue that. And give yourself some time to try some things out. And some of you in the room are interning with hopefully a future scalable startup, or some of you in the room or on Zoom are launching your own thing. And that's great. And now is a wonderful time to take that risk and take some risks and see if it's something that you want to continue to do, and think about your risk reward profile. And if all along the way, something just doesn't feel right to you, just be open to that. You can change it. You can change your mind on it, and it's okay. And make sure to find good partners and advisors as you go through your journey. So I'm going to open it up to questions. I want to encourage people to connect with me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'll usually give you some time if you have any further questions and want to dive into anything more specific. But thanks so much for being with us today. And I hope that you see yourself in this presentation in one of the 8 types of entrepreneurs. So thank you.
We have an online question. Where would you categorize Elon Musk?
Elon Musk is, I'd say, probably in the innovator category. He definitely has a vision for changing the world, and he's done it multiple times. So that's probably where I'd put him. Yeah.
I just want to know what kind of tools or skills have you found most useful in starting these businesses?
I think the number one thing is to define your problem. If we are thinking about the problem, we're thinking about it in a way that is relevant to the target audience. So these go hand in hand. Have you ever heard the saying about the 1/4-inch drill and the 1/4-inch drill bit. Have you ever heard that? So there's a saying from a Harvard professor, sorry to talk about Harvard, but it's a good quote. And he basically says, this marketing professor at Harvard says, we're not going to sell the 1/4-inch drill bit. What people really want is the 1/4-inch hole. It's the solution they care about. They don't care how they got there. So if you have a company idea or product idea, and it's a super cool technology, but it doesn't solve a problem for a particular group, are they going to care? What problem are you solving? And does that audience care? Because if they care, then they'll be willing to pay for it. And we want to have a business that has the ability to thrive on its own one day. So we need to drive revenue and we need to drive cash flow. So driving revenue is the top line that we of course need, and the market adoption will come the more we understand the problem and who we're selling to. So that's probably the number one thing I would start with. Yes.
What was your first startup and how did you get involved with it?
The very first startup I was involved with was a Tepper related, not Tepper, a CMU related company. It was a search related technology for text and video. And this was 1998. And it also had, it was acquired by the number 2 search engine in the world at the time in 1998. And I was an intern. I was on the marketing team. And it was interesting to see at that time, both from the startup side that was acquired, and I was then traveling to the parent company. So that summer, I got to see both sides of that coin. The second company that I was affiliated with as a startup was also related to Tepper, or I keep saying Tepper, to Carnegie Mellon. And it was also in the search space. It was kind of this burgeoning tech area, I guess, back then. And had also venture backed. Yeah.
Two questions here. One is, could you say a little bit more about the hustler? Because you said the least about that. You mentioned that one individual as a kind of perfect model of a hustler, but maybe we go into a little bit of detail about the kinds of things he does that qualifies as hustler. And the other is, as I was listening to these, I mean, clearly these are not standalone categories. They bleed into one another.
Correct.
And maybe you could talk a little bit more about that. I think the one that that comes to mind immediately is number 5, just because that's the most romantic version of a startup. The Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak alone in the garage.
Yeah, maybe what I'll do is I'll go to the list so we can have it in front of us. Yeah, I think you're right, Dario, the categories are going to bleed into each other. They're not mutually exclusive. So let's start with the hustler question. I think the hustler is almost like a cult of personality type of approach and type of person. The way that Gary Vee has grown his company has been largely with him on the forefront. Now, that doesn't mean he's not built systems and processes in the back end, and he has teams of people that work with clients. He's not the only one working with clients, but let's face it, it's the Gary Vee show. So I think one of the characteristics of a hustler company or a hustler entrepreneur is they themselves are in the front. They're the front and center. The watch out, if I put my M&A hat on, is the watch out there is that we don't want to create a company that cannot thrive without its owner. So I'm sure that Gary Vee, being a very smart guy, has built the systems and processes and the brand recognition around VaynerCheck Media so that if he's not running it day to day, or that he's not the rainmaker for sales and revenue generation, the company can still thrive without him. One litmus test is, can he ever take a vacation? Now, maybe he doesn't because he chooses not to. But my guess is that they have enough systems and processes set up where he could take a vacation. He probably doesn't because that's how he's wired. Another way to look at that, what was your second question?
How they bleed together, because
How they bleed together? Okay.
Because you could certainly connect innovative with scalable startup.
Yeah.
And small business, because Apple started.
Absolutely. Yeah. Did I answer your question? No, there's another question there. I just want to make sure I hit it.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to go into depth about how they connect, how you
Yeah, I mean, I
often
think
see,
you could
because I'll
choose
bet
a
there are
path.
some that are natural, pairs
Sure.
or trios.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the way to think about this discussion and how it's relevant to you, there might be one particular category that just like, oh yeah, that's me. Not everyone's going to start out as a large company experience unless you're in a large company. So that one's sort of its own entity, right? However, you could say, well, wait a minute, what if I'm acquired by a large company? Could I be part of the buy perspective of a large company? And I would say, yes, you can. Because remember, in the beginning of this conversation, it's about thinking down the path. Who might acquire you one day is a good thing to think about if you're envisioning your company to have an exit, which let's face it, 100% of us are going to leave the company one day. So what I encourage my clients to think about is who should own your company after you? And can you reverse engineer that? So you're thinking about a potential exit as you're building and growing your business so that you know what's important to your potential acquirer. So for example, if we know that recurring revenue is super important to this category of potential buyers, then we should have a recurring revenue model. Or if we're learning that certain key performance indicators are super important, we need to construct that so that we're tracking those things over time. There's other examples as well. Your strategy could be, we want to get acquired because we are solving a very niche problem for a particular market space. And it's going to be something that's difficult to replicate. So if a company is going to acquire us, they will do so because they want our knowledge, our technology. They might want our people. I don't know if this is a term you've heard, but an acqui-hire strategy, where they want that know-how, they want the intellectual property, they want the people. And so for some companies, acqui-hire is absolutely important. So yeah, for sure. I would say, think about these categories, which one resonates most with you, and that over time you might be fueling other pieces of it. If you're a social entrepreneur, chances are, yeah, you could start out as a small business, you could start out as a scalable startup, but it's this ethos of I am mission-driven, purpose-driven around the environment, around social causes, and that category is meaningful in that way. Yes.
So you mentioned your podcast a couple of times. I just wanted to ask, how do you think your podcast has helped progress your career? And a follow up to that, I want to see, have you learned any new ideas that have helped you in your professional?
I'm a big believer in continuous learning. And whenever I do an interview, somebody comes on my show, I try to learn from them as much as have a good conversation and make it interesting for the audience. And I have continued to build my knowledge base by talking with these amazing entrepreneurs about not only what's worked, but what has not worked. And you can learn a lot from people's challenges, right? And so I think that's an awesome thing. You know, when you're in school, undergrad or grad school, it's all about learning. But when you get into the working world, it's easy to stop learning because you're so busy doing. For me, in my career, 25 plus years, I've always continued to learn, whether it's in my discipline or a new discipline. There's just been something that is in me that I want to continue to learn. So my podcast has been a mechanism for that. Also, without having 125 of my own stories, right, and having literally things that I can talk about from my own experience, there are some of that, but now I have a breadth of content that I can talk about in presentations and workshops and client meetings and using it to help my clients make good decisions about different things. And so the other part of it in terms of building the base for me as a business advisor and consultant and M&A advisor is the ability to relate to different people, meet them where they are. And so these stories enable me, help me do that. I would say also, it's funny, I do a lot of videos with LinkedIn and I do postings about the show. And it's almost like a business card, you know. Oh, if people are like, oh, Laurie, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you so long, but I saw your videos all the time. And it's a way that they can connect. I've had clients reach out because they heard me on my show, that it's an authentic medium to get to know someone without really getting to know someone. They've heard me over and over and over, and they wanted to connect. Now as an author, that's going to be another business card, you know, for people to read the book and connect that way. So it's a very, very interesting thing. If there's a topic that you are interested in, you want it to help promote your business, there are really amazing ways out there to do that with video, with podcast, audio, and certainly other mediums like Medium, and writing and blogs and books or whatever is right for you. Yeah.
How effective would you say large corporations?
Well, I don't have any data to support that off the top of my head. I'm sure there might be some data, but with the corporate startup lab class, what we talk about a lot is the process. And I think there are some companies that excel at having some process, but maybe it doesn't get them the outcomes they're looking for. I just coincidentally did an interview yesterday with a gentleman who, he's also an author, and he consults with large companies about innovation. And I asked him kind of a related question to what you've asked. And what he said was, he sees them not doing a good job at even the upfront part of ideation. And potentially the gap could be a number of things. One is called innovation theater. Is anyone familiar with that phrase? Innovation theater is, we do innovation. We do it, right? You'll hear the CEO say it, or it's in their, it's on their website. But when you get down to it and you find out what they're really doing, they're not really doing it. It's like this mask of, so the theater, it's the art of, yeah, it kind of looks like we're doing it, but we're not. So that's one problem potentially. Another potential problem is how these ideas are generated may not really be relevant to the audiences they care about, or they're not really problems to solve. So if that's the most important part of the process, because we had a question about that and that's how I answered it, if we are not doing a good job at that, then the rest of the process is going to fall apart. The companies that I've seen and I've had some experience with, whether it's American Eagle or Safety.io, I was an advisory board member for them, where they've done a really good job is staying focused on solving a key problem that is in a market niche, and they've developed a scalable business around it that the customers care about, and it's iterative, And so some companies, if they have a portfolio of innovation teams, Team A, Team B, and Team C, how they allocate resources and make decisions about killing a project or continuing a project can also be a challenge. So for example, let's say in company X, we have an innovation team and we've invested 2 years and $50 million. How do we judge whether or not we should continue with that project? Some companies will say, it's 2 years, it's 50 million in the hole, we're done. Other companies might say, wait, let's look at this versus that. Let's look at how we might see this over time. Let's understand the strategic benefit. And they might make a different decision and say, okay, we're going to continue to invest. We're going to continue to go. So that there's no one answer for how a company does it. And the ones that are going to succeed are going to continue to evaluate the effectiveness of their innovation in a way that makes sense for their businesses. It might, even if it's break even, there could still be spillover benefits for those innovation projects to their current customer base. It doesn't have to always be, well, we need a 300% return. So those are some of the reasons.
In my own experience, to build on what Laurie said, one of the reasons corporations often don't do well with innovation is, first of all, culture. It's already calcified, and they're not trained to think innovatively. They're trained to sell stuff and constantly, increase revenue. And very often you'll see them going directly to the solution without even vetting the problem, as Laurie said. It's so important to resist the temptation to immediately go to solution and fall in love with it. And I can understand why, because I'm guilty like every other innovator. The other reason they may not do it is because they can't figure out a way to isolate that group. When I was with a corporation that wanted to do innovation, they eventually got to the idea that they should just take us, we were a small group within the company, and just put us somewhere else, literally. I don't know if you've ever heard the term skunk works. I won't give you the history of it, but if you Google skunk works, it came about because of the aerospace company, I think it was Martin, that was doing research for the Department of Defense, and it had to be top secret. So they were literally in buildings that were in another location that were camouflaged. And, if you Google it, you'll see where the word skunk works comes from. But they were isolated from all the administrative nonsense that goes on with just conducting business. And they were given free rein to innovate, create, different ideas, try them out, do prototypes, fail quite a bit. So those are two things from my experience. Makes corporate innovation challenging.
Thank you, Dario. Any other questions? Anything online?
None online. Do you guys have any other
Anything in the room? Yeah.
So I'm thinking that because some people they have startup, they don't usually categorize them into this and then start. Sometimes they just like chance, opportunity, and timing. It's the right time to have a startup, and then they categorize it each of this category. And I'm just thinking that what benefit that we can have once we categorize into this. Is that something like how we can look into this kind of category and see what the company or startup or their case starting, how they success or how they do it?
It could be. I'll give you an example under social entrepreneurship. So one of my clients is a social entrepreneur, and he provides an education as a service to high schools for sexual health and wellness for teenagers. So that involves her as a teacher, which is time, right? It's her time. So what she and I were talking about was how to create a product that could reach millions. Because it's difficult for her to reach millions. She's one person, right? But she has this amazing content and a very important content to help people with their quality of life. So when I was working with her on a business plan for that product, I wanted to get a sense of what other social entrepreneurship platforms were out there and who was funding them. So knowing that we fit into that category was important because I wasn't looking in the wrong place. So that's one example. I think it might be less important for other companies. Like if you're creating a tech product, you have to say which one you're in. I mean, chances are if you're creating a tech product, you might want to be here, right? And whether or not you're going to get bought one day and you might end up here isn't the point. So I wouldn't get too caught up in saying which category am I. If you have an idea and you think that idea has some merit based on problems to solve and a potential market, and if you yourself are saying, well, let's say you want to invent the next Microsoft and you want to really study how they did it and what that case study was and how they got there, or you want to create the next best Walmart. Yeah, I mean, sure, that's absolutely what the imitators do. They study what hasn't worked or what has worked, and then they figure out a better way to do it. So I think to your question, also about buyer entrepreneurs, these acquisition entrepreneurs, there are networks of people that I never knew about, frankly, until I started looking. These acquisition entrepreneurs are learning from each other in LinkedIn groups, moderated Zoom meetings, and other resources that are out there. And they are definitely learning from each other. So if you're looking for finding those good advisors and finding good partners along the way, figuring out which category you're in might be a great start, because then you're going to try to find other people similar to you, or where you can, find the right people to help you on your journey.
And for me, your survey has helped me think of these as strategies or modes of thinking, not so much having a desire to say, oh, what am I? What animal these 8 animals am I? It's more being able to recognize what each one of them represents and to toggle maybe back and forth, because I would imagine entrepreneurs probably have their fingers in several of these.
Yeah, and again, just to relate back to my own personal story, I did not have the risk profile to be the founder of a scalable startup. If I'm very honest, and I'm being honest with you, I just didn't. So for me, that would not have been a good path for me. It probably would have not led to a good place. I would have been more comfortable as a buyer acquisition entrepreneur. And I was very comfortable working in a large company. And I was a great employee at a scalable startup, but not the founder. That's my profile. So that's why I want to encourage all of you to get to really know yourself and what risk and reward scenarios you are comfortable with, because you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you feel trapped and it's affecting your health. Let's face it, it's not easy to be an entrepreneur. It's not. You have to look at your strengths, look at your motivations, and look at the fit of what you're going into. And again, find that right part for you on your journey. That's why I'm encouraging you to have these thoughts now, so that you pick the path that makes the most sense for you. So thanks so much for being here, and I appreciate you having me. Thanks, Allison. Thanks for setting this up.